Episode 22, How to Be a Better Man in 2025. The Dear Young Men podcast is a weekly podcast that posts Tuesday at 8 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, where we talk to the 20-year-old version of myself and all the young men out there that need guidance. This is going to be broken down into chapters, and we're going to start with Chapter 1, What is a Man? And what makes them a good man? And this is obviously a pretty loaded question because I think the answer does change from person to person, but I do have a few questions that we need to sort of solve throughout this podcast today. The first one is, what makes someone a good man? How do they carry themselves around others? What do they do on a daily basis? What do people think of them? And what makes for a good role model? So we're going to try to work through all of these things. The men obviously have tendencies. They get frustrated quickly. They take risks. They do great big things. They want to achieve high, fantastical heights. And they are aggressive. They like women. There's a lot of things that men typically just want. And we're going to try to parse through all of that stuff. What of that is good and what of that is sort of bad? And exactly how do we want to be emulating ourselves and portraying ourselves and living over in 2025 and obviously beyond 2025. I thought this would be a timely podcast because it's a time of year where I think everybody takes a little bit of time back to reflect on the previous year. And, I feel like recently, almost every year, I feel like I look back and go, I could have done more. I could have done so much more, but I always think like what kind of man was I? And this last year I let myself down in parts, but I feel like looking back, I was pretty happy with the way that I was. I just think that there are a lot of things that I could change, which is why I sort of wanted to reflect back on this podcast and talk about everything that I want to do and that I think people should be doing to become better men, because there are very few role models in the world that are actually good. Most of them are just trying to sell you something or get your money in some form or fashion. So let's go to Chapter 2, Women, Sex, and Drugs. And this chapter is actually all about Dan Bilzerian. If you don't know who he is, he's basically just sort of a playboy type. He's wealthy, at least he sort of projects that. He's always taking pictures with beautiful women on his Instagram. He is very large. He's a very strong man, and he sort of encapsulates every hyper masculine thing to its peak, to its fullest extent that people think of, oh, this is what men are. They're big, strong people. They can move stuff. They look a certain way. They have a certain amount of money. They're good with women. All the women that they communicate with, they're making, not love, but they're doing that activity with them. And that's sort of the hyper masculine view of everything. And Dan Bilzerian is sort of every single part of that. And he shows that in an extreme degree on his Instagram, which I looked at and I felt bad because it's a lot of women who are basically just like basically naked, but not quite naked, so that he doesn't get kicked off of Instagram. So looking through his Instagram for a little bit, the first thing you notice is obviously the women. He's never wearing a shirt. If he is, it's like because he's shooting guns. He is often photographed with a private jet around, very nice cars, expensive watches, boats. He's always in the Caribbean, so he's portraying a few things. One of them is he's obviously the sex angle. He's showing women, and he's showing women in a way that's not motherly. He's showing women in a way that's just like, this is what women are. These are their bodies, and I'm going to use them, and they're using me because I'm posting a picture of them so that way they will gain followers. But then obviously I'm going to be reciprocated by probably some other lewd activities that we shouldn't be discussing. Even though I called this women, sex, and drugs. The next one is that he is always going to beautiful places. He constantly has beaches, the bluest water you've ever seen, boats. He's got a private jet that he's always seems to be around, cars, money, just the whole 9 yards. Any way to portray wealth, he's portraying wealth in that way. Is he rich on earth? Yeah. Is he rich in heaven? I don't know. That's not for me to judge. And then obviously he's on steroids. Everybody is. I think steroids is one of those new weird epidemics. I talk about the, I can't say it, PORN, that epidemic, corn we'll call it. And I think that is a huge thing affecting men. There are other things that are starting to pop up recently that I've noticed. One of them is sports gambling, and the other one is steroids. I think those three things are sort of hypermasculinity taken to its farthest extreme. You have obviously the angle men, sex, drugs, and women. That's what they like. I mean, that's basically all those things. And then gambling is a form of drugs, more of an addiction. And so he is showing this hyper performative masculinity, like this is what it means to be a man. I don't know how he is. Like I don't know him personally, but just what he's portraying is the type of masculinity that men should not be looking up to, especially not younger men, which is who I'm certain is who's following him. I'm sure it's not a bunch of 57-year-old women. It's a bunch of 20 and under men who just want to look at the pretty girls or just want to live his lifestyle because he lives such a cool lifestyle. And so are those the things that make you a man? Like, I get it. Beautiful women. I married a beautiful woman. Beautiful women are great. I married one. But is that what it's all about? And then is it all about growing a business, sleeping around, doing drugs, sports betting, and then dying alone without a legacy? And it sort of brings us back to the question, what does it mean to be a man and how can we be a better one? That obviously is not a perfect example of it. So that'll bring us to chapter 3, Women, Sex, and Drugs, part 2. And I think that something is happening with young men and it's really disturbing. I don't know if I could say the name of this either. ONLYFANS. OF, we will call it for short. You know what it is. It's a site where women will take pictures of themselves and they will post them and men will pay for it. I think there's chatting features where you can send a woman money and she will send you something in return. So just online I don't know if I can say that either. I literally don't know what I can say. I feel like I get censored. But online so that's basically what it is. And I found this picture from this guy on Reddit, which was the most insane thing I've ever seen. And I think this is like the extent of men's depravity into this porn addiction is pretty remarkable. Accidentally used the company credit card for OF. What do I do? Throwaway account for obvious reasons. I have my company credit card saved in my phone. I barely ever use it, but it's MasterCard like my other bank. I had subscribed to a girl for ages, but never paid for anything beyond the subscription until the B/G dropped. I don't know what that is. And I, of course, mixed up the two MasterCards cards. It was 50 euros, horrendous stuff I know, and has made me realize I need help. You can have a laugh at this, but I genuinely appreciate a couple of suggestions as to what I should do. So this guy, obviously, this is taking it to the furthest extreme. I think that this stuff, this is a crazy example. I think it can be worse. It could ruin marriages, easily ruin marriages, ruin families. And obviously ruining a marriage is terrible for the family and terrible for the kids, mostly because no kid wants their parents to be divorced. And seeing this guy, you know it's a guy. Like, you just know it's a guy because this is stuff that guys do. I imagine the number of people on OF paying for OF, the percentage is probably 99.8% men and then 0.2% women. It's probably what it is. So why OF? Like, why are they doing this? And I think that there's like a couple of reasons that they're retreating into the digital world. I think one of them is that they've been told that masculinity in itself is inherently bad. So you see the Dan Bilzerians sort of spit in the face of that culture and say, no, it's not bad, and I'm going to turn it up to 11 to show you how good it is, which obviously isn't good, but you can almost respect that in a way. It's like, well, he's pushing back. He's pushing back against the culture, telling him that him in himself is bad. So I think that part of it is that it's easy. It's right there. There's no effort involved, obviously, to find a woman, to date her, to court her, to marry her. That's a long, extended process. And then at the end of it, you finally get that part of it, the sex part of it. A lot of women now will give it to you way before that, which I think is wrong because they're devaluing themselves when they do that. And no woman has ever felt good after doing that. Like that one woman who I think she slept with 100 men in a row, and she's not ashamed of it, which is mind-boggling. How is that a good thing? How does she feel good after doing that? I couldn't imagine how she could possibly feel good, how she could possibly devalue herself so much, like what brought her to this point. of doing that. And I think she now said she wants to break the record and have like do that with the most amount of men that has ever been done in like a 24-hour period. I don't know exactly what it is. It's like a lot of people over a 24-hour period, and she wants to break the record, which is insane. Who's keeping this record, for one? And for two, you want to break that record? Like, what's wrong with you? If you treat yourself like an object, men will treat you like an object as well, and which is obviously not what we want men to do, because I think that's like the baseline desire for a guy, is to try to do that. That's like their first instinct is to go out and find a woman and put a kid in her and then run away and blah, 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 blah. But that's not what it means to be a good man. That's just part of being a man. So I think that it's also like, it's secretive too. So there's no shame in it. And the only shame is between you and God. And if you don't believe in God, then there's no shame, because you're not doing anything wrong, and there's nothing holding you to saying that, well, what you're doing is wrong. And so I think like those are two of the biggest things, that it's just easy and there's no shame. There's just nothing stopping you from doing it. People can tell you that it's wrong. I'll tell you that it's wrong. But there's nothing really preventing you from doing it other than yourself saying, no, I shouldn't do this. And I think that you need something bigger to stop you than that. I also looked it up, and Addiction Help states, this is their reasons: brain chemistry, of course, materialist, elevated dopamine levels and brain chemistry changes contributes to corn addiction. Underlying disorders, mental health conditions often co-occur with that type of addiction. Relationship problems or relationship difficulties can lead to problematic corn use. I saw today that over 60 or 70% of all couples have gotten married, and they met each other over apps, which is over the internet, which is just wrong, and it's bad, because the app is such that you swipe left or right, and you're treating these people like objects, and you're basing them off their looks, off of just like looking at them, and their first thing is just their looks, and that's all you're looking at them, and that's all you really know about them. And so then you make that decision there. Whereas like a real relationship, that is one of the most, like, when I went up to my wife, it's not because I thought she had a great personality. Like, it's not. It's because I thought she was hot. And then you figure out her personality later. But going up to somebody and doing the thing, I think that makes a lot of men nervous, and they don't want to do it. So they just don't, because they don't have to anymore, because they can just send a girl a DM or a Snapchat or any of these other things that are way easier and basically no risk. You could send an email to email. I sound like I'm 500 years old. You could send a DM to somebody, and there's no risk if she doesn't read it or she blocks you or whatever. Then it's like, okay, well, whatever. But if you go up to a girl in public and say, hey, you're cute, can I get your number? Maybe we could go out sometime. Then you run that risk of getting denied, and getting denied in person, your face gets flushed red. I mean, it's happened, it's part of it. Like, if you haven't experienced it, you haven't lived. And, we all have had to deal with that. But for some reason, the new generation of men are like, I don't care about that. I'm just going to do it regardless. I don't care. And the thing is like, you can't build confidence in yourself if you can't approach a woman and ask her face to face. I think that there's a lack of confidence that you're going to have in your entire life. I know when I had no confidence, and I was like, screw it, I'm just going to ask somebody for their number. And then they said yes, and nothing happened from it. And I only ever dated, and I only ever, got my wife's number. But hypothetically, if I had gotten more women's numbers and thought other women were attractive, potentially, not that I ever would, because my wife's the only girls I got I have eyes for. I think that being able to like go and get that rejection or get that acceptance gives you an overwhelming sense of confidence. And all it takes is like a couple times to do it. And then it's like, it becomes a lot easier. Just that first hurdle. Like, the worst somebody could say is no. And it really is like, that's it. The worst they could say is no. So anyways, the next thing is lack of sexual satisfaction can drive individuals to rely on corn. I can understand this, but again, it's like, the whole culture sort of revolved around this sense of satisfaction, and they're not getting it from their wife within a marriage. They're getting it from somebody else who's being used, and they're using them. And so there's a lot of using going on, and there's nothing like, it's a fleshly thing that we've been given, and it feels good, but it's being abused and used in a way that it never was meant to be used. And just doing things for the flesh, I think, is just ultimately wrong. And then a psychological escape. It can be escape from stress and other issues. These are probably part of it. I think that it's much more than that, though. I think those are sort of like the symptoms of it, potentially, not really the causes. I think what it is a spiritual gap. And what makes men so comfortable watching porn? Why are they not holding themselves to a higher standard? And like, what about toxic masculinity? And toxic masculinity is a very interesting idea. And it's an idea that I had to look up because I think I know what it is, but I wanted to see what WebMD says it is. Need for control. Toxic masculinity encourages men to assert their power and dominance. Promiscuity. Toxic masculinity praises men for having multiple sexual partners while expressing disgust at women who do the same. Refusing to help with household duties, which, dude, I mean, who doesn't want to do I hate doing household duties. I'm a toxic male. Risk-taking. Taking risks and suppressing fear is another feature of toxic masculinity. So taking risks is a bad thing. Sexual aggression towards women. Stoicism. That's a negative trait of toxic masculinity. And violence. Toxic masculinity encourages men to use aggression and violence to assert their dominance and masculinity. 23% of report found that 23% of U.S. men believe that if needed, men should use violence to get respect. So a lot of these I disagree with. The need for control thing, I think that that is just sort of an inherently part of men thing. People like men want to control stuff, women want to control stuff. I think that's just sort of like whatever. I mean, you have to put control in a box and not be controlling, but have control. You want to be in control. You don't want to just be like all over the place, flailing all over the place. Like, that's not good either. Promiscuity, obviously, this is a bad thing. This is pushed by the Dan Bilzerian types, the hyper-masculine, the performative masculinity. We know that that's wrong. Refusing to help with household duties. I mean, I got to be honest. My wife and I, we do things in a much more traditional manner, and I don't really hardly do anything around the house. I also work 60 to 80 hours a week, and you talk to I talk to my wife about it, and I say, like, you don't have to do this. I could do blah, 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 blah. But it's like, what we're trying to do is be the most fulfilled in the stuff that we have to do. Household chores need to be done and need to get done by somebody. And somebody needs to make money. My wife would rather stay at home and raise the kids. And I would rather go to work and try to make the money. And so we found a little bit of a meeting ground saying, okay, well, since I'm going to work and making the money, and while I'm working, why don't you do the house stuff? And it's basically just, it's what's the most fulfilling to me, and it's also what's the most fulfilling to her. Obviously, I'm not opposed to doing it occasionally. I'll clean a dish or two, but ultimately my wife does most of that stuff, and she doesn't work. She works 20 hours a week. I work almost 3 or 4 times more than she does, and that's okay because that's what the agreement we have, and I feel like that's what works really well for us. Next thing, risk-taking. Risk-taking is not a bad thing. Suppressing fear and taking a risk is a valuable, extremely masculine trait. Is not toxic to be a risk taker. That is what has driven humanity forward in so many cases. The people who have done all the great things, they haven't all been men, but they've all suppressed fear. A lot of them have been men. I mean, to be fair, but they have suppressed fear, and they've just taken that leap, and they've taken huge risks. Stoicism or sexual aggression towards women. This is bad, obviously. I mean, we don't have to say that. Stoicism. This is true. I mean, not showing emotions, especially in a relationship. You as a man are like your family's bedrock. As the father, as the husband, you're the family's bedrock, and that's the foundation. You're the foundation of their whole world. And if you're not a rock, if you're just all over the place, if you're like sand flowing in the breeze, they can't build a strong foundation on you. You have to be. I talk about Alice a lot, where he carries the whole world, and the world is your family. You have to be Alice. If you're going to take a day off and break and I'm tired, I don't want to do it today, somebody has to hold up the world for your family, and it's going to have to be you. So stoicism, sorry, you just have to be a little bit more stoic. You're not going to be able to show your emotions. I'm not saying you shouldn't ever cry. Like, I am actually somebody who cries a lot, but you have to conceal. Like, I cry at everything, I feel like, and I'm always tearing up. But it's like, I don't want my kids to see me weeping and crying at everything all the time. Obviously, there's a time and place, but at the end of the day, whatever. And then violence. Toxic masculinity encourages men to use aggression and violence to assert their dominance and masculinity. This is a tricky one. I mean, in some cases, yeah, you do need to be violent. I think I've heard a quote where it's like, you don't want you want to be dangerous, but you don't want to have to use it, basically. And it's like trying to find a balance. But I don't think violence isn't necessarily the answer all the time. But sometimes it probably is. So after all that, I think that we're missing one key piece, which will bring us to chapter 4, Jesus Christ, superstar. So as always, we're going to go back to the Son of Man, Jesus Christ, because he is the way, the truth, and the life, and he is the perfect example of masculinity, the masculinity that we need in the culture, and the masculinity that if we could all live into his version of masculinity, the world would be a better place. Obviously, if we were all like Jesus Christ, the world would be a better place, but we won't all be like that, but we have to try our best to try to live into his idea of masculinity. How was he a good man? I mean, we know he didn't sin. We know the story. We know everything that he did. But how was he a good man? First, the bedrock of his manliness starts with love, which is not a traditional, like, we didn't read love in any of those. And that's the difference between Jesus Christ and the world, is that he's the truth and we are the world. And so his foundation is love. For God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son, that whoever believes in him shall not perish but have eternal life. For God did not send his Son into the world to condemn the world, but to save the world through him. He didn't come here to point his finger and wag his finger at you and say blah, 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 and to condemn the world. He came to save the world, to pull you out of the world. And that's your only hope, is to put your faith in him. But that's a foundation of love. The whole story, Jesus Christ gets killed. That's the end of that's how that part ends. It's not the end of the book. We know that there's something that pretty magically happens a few days later after he does get murdered. But at the end of the day, the foundation is love. So what is love? There are a couple different places to find love. One of them is the Bible. The other one is the world. So we're going to look at the Britannica, and it defines it as an emotion characterized by strong feelings of affection for another arising out of kinship, compassionship, admiration, or benevolence. In a related sense, love, in quotes, designates a benevolent concern for the good or welfare of others. The term is also used to refer to sexual attraction or erotic desire towards another. Love as an individual emotion has been studied in several scientific disciplines, including psychology, biology, and neuroscience, anthropology, and sociology. So that is a definition. Very material. It has nothing to do with, it's like the dopamine. Oh, well, when you love somebody, serotonin gets released in your brain, dopamine gets released in your brain when you hug them, and that's what love is the release of dopamine, the release of serotonin, and that's not true, because love is so much more than that. Being able to have the hard conversation, being able to carry the weight, that's what it means to love. It doesn't mean like, emotions. There's also a definition from the Bible that I think is a little bit more accurate. If I speak in the tongues of men or of angels, but do not have love, I am only a resounding gong or a clanging cymbal. If I have the gift of prophecy and can fathom all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have faith that can move mountains, but do not have love, I am nothing. If I give all I possess to the poor and give over my body to hardship that I may boast, but do not have love, I gain nothing. Love is patient. Love is kind. It does not envy. It does not boast. It is not proud. It does not dishonor others. It is not self-seeking. It is not easily angered. It keeps no record of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. Love never fails. But when there are prophecies, they will cease. Where there are tongues, they will be stilled. But where there is knowledge, it will pass away. So that is a better definition of love. Love is so much more than just a strong feeling of affection for another arising out of kinship, compassionship, or admiration. It is so much more than that. Love for my wife has meant to sacrifice. Love is sacrifice. Love is also, I do love her. I do have a ton of affection toward my wife, and we have 2 kids, obviously. And so part of that definition is partially true, but love is so much more than that. And love is eternal, and love should never fail. So it's sacrifice, it's eternal, but how can you show love as a man? And it's different. Like, showing love as a woman is different than showing love as a man. If I did the things that my wife did to show affection towards me, she wouldn't really reciprocate to that, and I wouldn't really be able to do it as well, because we're different. She has a tenderness, a kindness, a gentleness about her, and I'm sort of a bore. I'm like, I'm hard-nosed, I'm a knuckle dragger, I'm an idiot. You know what I mean? Like, I'm just an ape at the end of the day. So how can you show love? So there's a great quote, and it's like, showing love. We talked about Atlas earlier, but showing love is instead of asking for a lighter load, it's to ask for broader shoulders. It's to carry the burden of your entire family, and to never expect a thank you. You don't want to demand a thank you from them for carrying a heavier burden or carrying a heavier load for them, because that's what you're here for. The image you present as a man is that you show to the world should be of a man that loves his family, that'll do whatever they need him to do, not because he wants to, but because he has to. Having duties and responsibilities is what part of what it means to be a man, and taking on those duties and responsibilities taking the bull by the horns and just doing it and doing the thing, and not asking for a thank you and, oh, well, I did this today, am I going to get a kiss and a thank you? It's like you just do the thing and then you move on, and then that's it, and that's life. And it's better that way. If you're asking constantly for reassurance that what you do is good, it's not love, it's something else. And finally, be lighthearted, have fun, be serious when it matters, but laugh when it doesn't. Love is rolling around with your kids, giving them kisses on the stomach, tackling them, playing with them, being there for them. And it's just, to love as a man is to sacrifice, but it's also to just be there and be fun and be happy and not be concerned with the world, because the world is physical and the world will turn to dust before we know it. It's just like, we talked about this last episode, but it's building up for yourselves treasures in heaven and not treasures on earth. So not loving money over anything, and not putting money over anything, but putting your family and God and Jesus Christ and putting those things above yourself and your own self. And so the examples of Jesus's masculinity is coded throughout the entire story, the entire text. Carrying the cross through the town, an innocent man, the most innocent man, undeserving of the punishment, yet he just does it. He bears the weight for all of humanity. He's murdered in the most painful way imaginable for our sins. Being crucified is the most painful way to die, and he does that because he loves humanity, because he wants us to feel his love, basically, and to be redeemed in his love. The humbleness to wash the feet of the disciples. You're not above anybody else. If anything, treat others like they're above you. Be humble, be kind. Doesn't matter if they're worth $1 billion or $1. You treat them the same way that you should treat everybody, and as you treat yourself, because Jesus is calling you to do that. Kindness, he shows extreme kindness when a prostitute comes up to him, and when the Pharisees bring him a prostitute and say, condemn her, she's slept with these men and blah, 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 blah. And he says, for those who have not sinned, throw the first stone. And then eventually all leave. And he says, you are forgiven, sin no more. And that's what he says. He doesn't say, well, I'm going to judge you for what you've done in the past. That's not what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to have kindness and gentleness towards those who need it. But he also has a boldness about himself when he goes into the temple and flips the tables and say, why are you selling all this stuff in my father's house? So he's kind and gentle. He's not a hippie. I mean, they portray him as a hippie. He's not a hippie. He's nothing like a hippie. He is kind and loving, but he's bold when required. He sticks to his guns, and when Satan is tempting him in the desert, offering him the whole world, he rejects him. He knows his death was inevitable, but he still finishes his ministry and legacy. There's something about him being a man where you want to die in the battlefield with your friends in a knight's armor, fighting for your country, for your wife, for your kids, for your legacy. That idea that every single guy, you pick up a guy off the street and say, if you could die like this, would you be happy? And it's always like one knight versus an entire army. And it's the Captain America versus Thanos' army where he stands up and he's ready to fight. That's what every guy wants, that fight. Every guy wants to die in the battlefield. So leaving a legacy, he doesn't leave kids, but he leaves a legacy that has impacted people for thousands of years, obviously. And hopefully you try to impact the world in a positive way the same way he has. You won't ever impact the world the same way he has, but you are called to try to impact the world as best you can. And obviously dying for something you believe in, being willing to give your life for your beliefs. That's what it means to be a man. All those things. It's not the money, it's not the girls, it's not the fame, it's not the fortune, it's none of that stuff. All that stuff is going to go away anyways. I mean, all the beautiful people in the world are not very beautiful when they're dead. All the people who had all this money are not very rich when they're dead. All that stuff, none of that stuff matters. But to be rich in the kingdom of heaven is really what matters. So instead of gathering yourself treasures on earth, the women, the money, the sex, the drugs, the dopamine hits, all that stuff. Reject all of that stuff, reject modernity, reject all that stuff, embrace real masculinity, the Christian true version of masculinity, and live into Jesus. Is there a perfect version of masculinity, a perfect definition of it? No, there's no string of words that I could put together. I'm not smart enough to put it together. But there was a perfect example of masculinity given to us, and his name is Jesus Christ. But if we can live as he did and do the things that he would do, you will begin to become a good man. And maybe your kids can look at you one day and say that my dad was a good man. And really, at the end of the day, that's all that matters. I'll see you in the next one. This has been Scott with the Dear Men podcast. If you liked it, hit 5-star, hit like, subscribe. I'll see you in the next one. Peace.